Welcome to the Nine, an era of transformation. I'm Ebony Brandon. Senator Isalean Phillip describes herself as a policy professional, and aptly so, as academically and professionally she has functioned as a social policy researcher and policy developer. In this episode of the Nine, an era of transformation, Senator Phillip explains how, although she did not envision herself transitioning from a technical role to one day being in government, she leapt at the opportunity after being asked by Prime Minister Drew to join his cabinet. In her new role as Minister with responsibility for social development and gender affairs, youth empowerment, aging and disabilities, she's now in a position to both develop and implement policies. As the youngest member of Dr. Drew's cabinet and one of 3 women who serve as government ministers, she's also able to contribute to nation-building efforts and help affect meaningful change that reflects the needs of young people, women, and other vulnerable groups. I've worked with the Senator in the past. She's organized, well-structured, and has a meticulous eye for detail. Her appointment was the last made to round out Prime Minister Dr. Terence Drew's team. She explained to me, while the call was quite unexpected, she was excited to accept and serve her country.
Senator Isalean Phillip describes herself as a policy professional, and aptly so, as academically and professionally she's functioned as a social policy researcher and policy developer. In this episode of The Nine, an era of transformation, Senator Phillip explains how, although she did not envision herself transitioning from a technical role to one day being in government, she leapt at the opportunity after being asked by Prime Minister Dr. Terence Drew to join his cabinet. In her new role as Minister with responsibility for social development and gender affairs, youth empowerment, aging and disabilities, she's now in a position to both develop and implement policies. As the youngest member of Dr. Drew's cabinet and one of 3 women who serve as government ministers, she's also able to contribute to nation-building efforts and help affect meaningful change that reflects the needs of young people, women, the elderly, and other vulnerable groups. Her appointment was the last made to round out Prime Minister Drew's team. She explained to me, while the call was quite unexpected, she was excited to accept and serve her country.
It was quite unexpected for me, to be honest. It was not really my intention by any means to work in government in any capacity. That was not my interest at the time when the Labour Party came into power in August 2022. But, it was also an offer that, was, of great privilege, who says no to the new Prime Minister. And also because, I believe in the vision of the St. Kitts Labour Party. And I believe that, St. Kitts and Nevis historically and in future is in the best hands of the St. Kitts Labour Party. It was really an honor for me to be asked, and then, for me to also rise to the challenge to say, yes, I'm willing to take on this leadership role as part of the new cabinet for the administration and government.
And the portfolio that you received as well, again, very suited to your academic training. You have a certificate in policy, government policy, and your substantive Master of Arts would have been in gender and women's studies.
That's correct.
How did you feel to be on the other side of it in terms of actually being in government now and putting those skills to use, not as a policy consultant, which I'm assuming you would have done in the past, but now as a policy maker?
I think, when I think about my own career trajectory, it's certainly, as you said, was kind of best suited. And for me, it was when I thought about it in that way, in terms of what I have to offer with this opportunity that has been presented to me. I really saw it as an opportunity to kind of use my skills, build my skills, to learn more, to really see how I could actually achieve some of the things that I just, in terms of my own sense of purpose, would want to be able to do. And so, before I came into government, I was very used to lobbying, advocating, doing aspects of policy development through the NGO sector as a means to influence public administration. But now being able to have the opportunity where, as you say, I'm on the other side, to be able to be in government and to have more direct oversight of public administration, I just certainly certainly hope and aspire that, with all the things that I've learned and the skill sets and the experiences in work that I've had outside of St. Kitts and Nevis, that I'm able to really contribute to the best of my ability to really improve and, support the process of transformation and sustainable development for us here now at this time.
A third of Prime Minister Drew's cabinet is comprised of women. It is also a blend of experience and youth. However, each member of the cabinet brings considerable skill and expertise to the table. Senator Phillip noted the importance of this balance to progressive governments such as Dr. Drew's.
It's certainly refreshing. I've not been a part of, government administrations before or spaces like these at the level that I have been before, so I don't have the greatest basis for comparison, but I have certainly been in work environments that have been dominated by men and being the only woman. And so for me, I think it's very refreshing, it's very inviting, and it's certainly a much warmer, it feels very much like a more nurturing space and a more supportive space to be able to be part of a leadership body at the highest level, in this political space, to be valued at the table, to be at the table, and to, have your skills and your competencies be recognized for that and for that reason only.
It's also a well-balanced cabinet in terms of youth and experience. So what has that been like in terms of that learning experience for you as a member of cabinet?
So I think for me, I certainly eat it all up. I feel like, I've always been very interested in just kind of gaining more knowledge and understanding. And for me, cabinet meetings go along, and for me, I don't always often have the most to say, because I think because of the fact that we have a good mix and balance of experience, of, expertise, I certainly am happy to kind of bring in the points of, fresh thought for innovation, but it's also a space where I'm learning a lot. And that's certainly been my experience since I've come in. I really do enjoy kind of hearing the perspectives of, the various ministers, Senior Minister in Cabinet, Dr. Douglas, who's been the Prime Minister for so long, also being able to understand the vision for the leader, Dr. Drew, in terms of where he wants to go, and then just having the kind of expertise and experience of other ministers who've been in and around, development in government just within the system for so long, like Dr. Hanley and even Dr. Clark herself, who's been a civil servant for years. And so for me, I think that certainly brings a very, very good, very, very beneficial and valuable mix of, experience, expertise, and also fresh innovation, which is what I try to offer in terms of that perspective, being the youngest member. And so I feel like it certainly is a very nurturing environment, and one that does have a true sense of camaraderie that is exchanged.
Almost all of the cabinet members I spoke with reported that they acquainted themselves with their teams within the new ministries, and many of the workers, to some degree or the other, were demoralized because they'd been rudderless and neglected for years. Senator Phillip's new ministry was not very different. While re-energizing the staff at all levels by providing leadership, structure, and well-defined and achievable goals was a challenge, it was also a blessing, as it provided the opportunity to implement new strategies to advance the government's agenda with an almost clean slate in hand.
When I arrived first, the sense and sentiment on the ground in terms of the attitude and the feeling, there was a lot of demotivation. When I first showed up, my office was not my office, to be honest. So while there was always a Department of Youth, there wasn't necessarily a separate ministry. I think the staff at the time felt a bit demoralized. It's kind of like, yes, you would hear out of the former administration just kind of having run-of-the-mill things where you have these departments, but the actual true investment and attention to these areas in terms of, the portfolios that I manage, the actual intention and the actual attention and effort and the backing was certainly not there. And so when I came in, I would have met with every department, staff in every department, management, and the common thread for me was just a certain attitude of, demoralization, a certain attitude of, lack of direction, of, people just kind of have no sense of fulfillment in their job, in their work, in their workspace. It's just something that you just showed up. There was no real structure, no real vision. And it was really unfortunate to see, because, you kind of come in and you're like, all these visions and plans, you want to like have a sustainable island state, but then recognizing that the very basic things, just in terms of staff, development, just in terms of capacity, it was just not there. So, we came in and we literally kind of have to start from scratch. I didn't have an office. I came in and it was kind of like, even just the space itself, just the physical environment needed its own work to kind of really just as a very basic upliftment. You could tell that before on the former administration that there just wasn't that same level of care that was really offered in doing the work, and for whatever the means, for the best and most positive means.
So when you got your staff back on track, you improved the environment, which really does make a very big difference in terms of people feeling that they have a dedicated space to get their work done. What was the next step for you?
The next step for me was to be able to bring everybody on board in terms of what the new vision is for the administration, and then what that meant for us in our subsection of that, where we fall. I think, one of the things about leadership that I think makes, strong and, more effective leaders is by making sure that every single person who's part of the team, who is part of the machinery, feels like they're valued and feels like, know that your job, regardless of what it is, even if it's just to keep the office clean, that you're also contributing to the bigger picture. And so I, again, would have taken my time to go around to each department. I have meetings, regularly with the senior management of all of my ministries, and to be able to communicate with them. Okay, so everybody's hearing the Prime Minister talk about sustainable island state. What does that mean for us? So I'm in the sector where we focus on the social protection pillar. That's where we fall. How do we ensure that, youth empowerment is mainstreamed across the board? What does that mean and what does that look like? How do we get the young people that we serve also interested in these things? In, social development, how do we improve our systems and processes so that people actually feel and believe that this is an administration that cares about children, that cares about seniors, that cares about young people? What is the work that we need to do? And my thing was always, I'm not here to duplicate or recreate the wheel, because, I grew up here. These systems have been in place before my time, and I expect them to be here after. But I recognize, the work was really about evaluating what we have done in the past, evaluating what has been broken over the past 7 years, and seeing where we need to fix and improve to be able to kind of grow and move on to help meet and support the bigger vision of this cabinet and of this administration.
Senator Phillip put her vast experience working with non-profit organizations and international agencies to work immediately as she began restructuring existing programs so that they were able to function more efficiently, and implementing new initiatives in order to fill existing gaps and provide services and support to the most vulnerable in our communities. Over the past 2 years, many of these newly implemented projects also checked off key manifesto promises made by the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party to the people of St. Kitts and Nevis ahead of the 2022 general elections.
Sure. So far, I think, Flagship, that's one of our most popular, is our Seniors Day program, which actually was in fact a manifesto promise of the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party. We came in and was certainly, I saw it as, one of those kind of low-hanging fruit opportunities where, there would have already been, a seniors enrichment program that was being delivered through the Ministry of Social Development. We came in and we would have, because the administration decided to place greater focus on youth, seniors, and persons with disabilities, we would have established a separate ministry that allowed for better administration more directly with these groups, to be able to focus more specifically on programming. And so we were able to, launch a new ministry as a subset of, social development, and then place greater focus on actually establishing seniors programs across the country. And so we would have started with a pilot at 3 community centers, which went exceptionally well. We would have also invested more in terms of expanding the actual seniors enrichment program, which is targeted to just, open to all seniors, and they do different activities monthly. So that's where we would have hosted our first seniors prom in 2023. And that's where we would have introduced, seniors to do kite flying as part of, the lead up to Good Friday and that Easter weekend. We would have also been able to introduce, arts and crafts and get our seniors out of their homes and out of isolation for them to be able to get more information. Just even terms, we would have introduced opportunities for them to hear from lawyers about estate planning. And so it's not just about, them socializing, but it's recognizing that by introducing this programming, we're also contributing to health outcomes, better health outcomes for our seniors, and just support in terms of, the inevitable time of aging, which will impact all of us. And so I'm very proud of that accomplishment. This year, actually just this month, we were able to launch the expansion of the program after it went so well in 3 different communities. So we were now able to launch in an additional 3 communities to be able to, spread the work and the support and the programming around. Additionally, with that, I think we've done well to be able to relaunch some things in terms of youth. With our youth summer camps and our summer programming, we would have done a National Youth Congress. And that is also an initiative where we're trying to really work together, work on the ground to target our young people to support the interventions, the early interventions that's needed around addressing crime and violence. And so that National Youth Congress really focused on thinking about violence as a public health issue, kind of talking to the young people because it's really manifesting on that level. And so the youth department taking the lead in initiatives that help to identify and, start to kind of nurture early interventions in these areas. That's the kind of vision that I have for the youth department, to see how we can help to fix some of these social problems and target some of our at-risk youths a bit more earlier.
Another of the significant shifts was the replacement of the Poverty Alleviation Program, PAP, implemented by the former administration, with the more comprehensive Livelihood Improvement for Family Transformation, or LIFT. In addition to providing support for vulnerable families, the new LIFT program emphasizes education, skills development, and other training to empower more families to elevate themselves and find new opportunities for upliftment.
In the social development side, through social services, the mammoth task that we came in to meet was just the way that the poverty alleviation program was running. And it was running just with no real sense of accountability, no real sense of transparency. It sat with the Ministry of Sustainable Development, even though it was supposed to be a social assistance program. And so when we came in, this for me was kind of the greatest and biggest challenge. It kind of continues to be, but we have slowly been able to make changes, implement new things, new approaches to managing this program and managing it as a social assistance program, not unlike others that are delivered through the Ministry of Social Development. And so, the process of change management has been challenging, but of course, we continue to try our best to manage the change which is necessary. In terms of, we have been able to implement a registration process to help improve transparency. We have been able to better manage the funds around the provision of this social assistance program by putting in very clear eligibility criteria, by targeting it more to ensure that we are supporting those who are in fact most vulnerable and not just kind of giving away free money just because with no real reasoning. And so we've been able to put some very clear parameters around the programming to help with the restructuring, and then also to relaunch, to be able to relaunch the program so that it has kind of a new brand and new identity, and also new initiatives that really help to target the reduction of poverty by actually helping to empower persons through case management. That's one thing that what I learned was stopped under the former administration when it came to just social services across the board. They just stopped case management in terms of where the practice of officers, case managers actually reaching out to clients who are receiving any type of assistance benefits through the Department of Social Services, the evaluations, the check-ins that they used to do in terms of going out to connect with people, in terms of providing people with wraparound services. That process was stopped, from what I understood under the last administration. Why, I don't know. But that was definitely part of the problem in terms of the effectiveness of our social protection initiatives, because if we're not managing the cases, if we're not really trying to understand why people are struggling, then we're not really targeting the source. But through the introduction of, Lift and, kind of the relaunch of the programming of our cash transfer assistance, we've been able to reintroduce case management. It's a process that is ongoing. And we're learning. We're learning a lot. There's definitely has been obviously some disruptions, some changes, because, people don't like changes. But they're necessary changes, they're important changes. And we are certainly reintroducing case management, but also we're doing it in a way that needs to be more supported with the technology. So digitization is also something that's newly introduced within the ministry with social services, where application processes are online. Case management is through a system that helps to kind of remove some of the work burden, alleviate some of that, and just make things a bit more efficient. So we're learning, we're growing, but I'm very pleased with how far we've been able to come in terms of having launched Lift, having been able to better manage the resources that have been allotted to us by finance through the budget to continue delivering this social assistance program, but also just being able to also collect information, more data around what the reality of people's lives are and the things that people are challenged by. So we know we have a lot of seasonal workers, and that means we need to be considerate of that. We know we have a lot of families that are single parent headed. We know we have something to think about. We recognize certain things like, there is lack of provision of child maintenance benefits. So there are also other sources where persons should be receiving income to help support them and help, lift their families out of poverty that are just not coming through. So that also then gives us opportunity to think about the larger system in terms of, okay, how can we improve in other areas so that it then also helps to support, our human and social development.
Senator Phillip's background as a researcher was evident in her explanation of the approach to managing her ministerial responsibilities. Data collection is vital to accurately assessing the needs of the beneficiaries of programs such as Lift. It is equally important for the government to have access to this information when planning and identifying resources required to adequately meet the needs of its citizens and residents. While some may see this as an intrusive process, Senator Phillip clarified the importance of compiling accurate data to advance the Sustainable Island State agenda and how it helps St. Kitts and Nevis achieve wider regional and international goals.
So the reason that we need this information and this data, because I am a very big believer in, data-driven policy development. And this is actually not just unique to us here in St. Kitts and Nevis, but this is actually a regional impetus it's a regional imperative, where also other jurisdictions in the islands, in the OECS and CARICOM, are actually placing a lot of emphasis on the need for us to collect more data so that we can localize the kind of policies and programs that we need to offer to our people to really help us as a Caribbean region, as Caribbean people, to actually achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And so for us here in St. Kitts and Nevis, we want to be able to collect the data to understand, how many people are really needing the assistance that we offer through social services. We need to know that, because then that helps us to actually, as you say, budget better, to know, okay, well, if we really need to support these people, this is the cost. We need the information because we also need to compare it to census data that we collect collect, to poverty assessments. Like, we need to understand what's the level of poverty in our country if we actually want to achieve SDG 2, which is no poverty. And we can't really do that if we don't have a real sense and understanding of who needs social assistance, who needs public assistance, because they are in fact the most vulnerable in terms of earning the least or having the most expenses, because maybe they have the most children, or, we won't know to be able to that, we won't know that maybe we need to create new programs that perhaps maybe target those that it's more like a child's benefit, because we understand, we have a greater understanding that the greatest expense for people is, when you have a child, and just, naturally, children are expensive. We won't know that maybe perhaps we need to help to facilitate more information or info sessions around parenting, maybe to help support persons in, just parenting their children. We won't know if we don't actually pay attention to the data trends, if we don't actually are intentional about collecting information to understand, well, what are people having to spend their money on? Is it the cost of food? If it's the cost of food, then what do we need to do to make food cheaper? So this is the kind of information that helps us to inform what we need to do, where we need to target our investments. Is the cost of energy too high? So is it the bills that, is it the cost of the bills to meet our basic needs? Are those the things that is really reducing people's purchasing power? Okay, what can we do as a government to help actually reduce these things for everybody across the board? Because that is a sustainable solution. Having to continuously pay for these debts that people have is not sustainable for the state. And so that's why we need the information. That's why we need to collect the data. But at the same time, we maintain and recognize that it is important for us to support people, to make sure that people can live with dignity by making sure they can maintain their most basic needs, which is food, shelter, and utilities. And that is the function of social services. That's the function of our social protection system. It's supposed to be there for everyone, because God forbid I or you can walk out of this office and get hit by a car, and then we will be disabled. Who knows, God forbid. Yes. But the reality is, at some point, any of us may need to be able to be caught by the social safety net that the government is ought to provide. But as a government, we also have a responsibility to do this in a way that is that's fair, and that ensures that we are good stewards of the resources and funds, that it can be sustainable. So that does require us to have vigilance in terms of making sure the system is not abused, which is also why we ask certain questions to know, well, where is your income? Are you really the most vulnerable? Because, yes, everybody has children. Majority of people have children, but, somebody who earns over $3,000 and has 2 children has more capacity than somebody who earns less than minimum wage and has the same 2 children. So these are just the considerations that we have to put into our policies when we come to delivering our programs, and we have to, the data allows us to make fairer judgments.
We can all agree that globally there is still much work to be done in ensuring equality and full inclusion for people in our communities who live with a disability. While our laws provide impressive protections for the rights of this vulnerable group, society must also keep pace. In the real world, this could look like making public spaces more easily accessible to people who require wheelchair access, providing instructions in Braille for the vision impaired, sign language interpreters for the hearing impaired, and modifying school campuses to cater to students with various disabilities. The very face of disability has changed as we recognize that they may not always be physical. They may also manifest in the form of learning disabilities, such as dyslexia, or neurological development disabilities such as autism. Fortunately, Senator Phillip is well prepared to lead the way in ensuring that the needs of the disabled members of our community are well met, as we are a diverse nation which has always prided itself on inclusivity.
I don't see it as an issue. I see it more as a reality of the diversity of our society. And so what that means is that for us, as a society, we need to learn how we accommodate and adapt to be able to ensure that people who just experience the world differently are also able to equally and more equitably experience a full life. As the same, they are entitled to a similar quality of life. And so, for me, when I see people who have disabilities, I don't see their disability first. I see them as a person. But I also recognize that we have had a small kind of failure just in terms of our own social development, of our own social awareness and our own consciousness around just persons with disabilities in the variety of disabilities that they can have. It's unfortunate, but historically in the past, persons with disabilities would have been shunned, they would have been misunderstood, they would have been stigmatized and marginalized just because of the difference that they show up with. But it's by no means their fault. I believe, as a woman of God, I believe, God created all of us in his image and likeness. And there's nothing wrong with you if you have a disability. You just experience the world differently. And so I think we need to raise our consciousness. We need to improve in terms of the level of kindness that we extend to persons with disabilities. And so that is the approach that I take, as a minister, as, somebody in public administration, when I'm having to come up with solutions and having to think about ways to be more, to actually, for us to change society, transform society so that we can actually be more inclusive. In the way that society has developed over time, there are actually a lot of barriers to persons with disabilities, whether that's physical, intellectual. And so for me, the job right now is, how do we break down some of these barriers? And how do we, as we move forward in building sustainability, in transforming into a more sustainable island state, how do we also build in approaches that think about accessibility? How do we ensure that just becomes a mainstream part of the way that we think? So, for example, we have our housing solutions that the government has promised. In building those, how do we make sure that the models of the homes have the option to ensure that a ramp can be included or that it's just more accessible? We need to think about that. For the new buildings that are being built, whether that's, government buildings, private enterprises, how do we raise consciousness around these stakeholders so that they too think about, okay, as a bank, I need to be able to service my clients who are wheelchair users. And for me, this is not a matter, these changes are not just because we're trying to accommodate persons with disabilities, but these will benefit all of us. Because as you age, them knees it's harder to lift them knees up them steps, So, I think we just need to think about how our society and how we can build our worlds, build our settlements, build our communities in ways that are just genuinely inclusive in just the way they appear, in being able for everybody to access. We have to think about disability, and I'm glad you said that, disability is just beyond the physical. We also have persons with intellectual disabilities, persons who live on the autism spectrum, and, persons who have Down syndrome. And, it's not that these persons cannot be productive or that they don't want to be productive, because they do. In my conversations with persons from the community, they want jobs. They want opportunities for skills training, because they also want to be productive citizens and contribute to the development of their country. But I think we need to do more to be able to, as I said, increase our awareness, increase our consciousness, and we need to be more intentional about recognizing, okay, as somebody on the spectrum, you might be really good at, a task that may be a little bit more repetitive, but, because of the way that you see the world, you might not see it as repetitive, but then that probably makes you the best and the most ideal person for this job, because that's not the way that you see this task. And so for me, the work right now in relation to persons with disabilities is For me, one, to improve just my own awareness and understanding of the needs of the community as they stand right now, to be able to, with the programming that at least is delivered through the ministries that I manage, to make sure that we think about wherever we do these activities, they have to be accessible. Let's start with, let me start with myself. How do we make sure of that? How do we have more conversations and more engagements with the private sector, with the public sector, across ministries, to be able to build awareness? For me, the challenge now, it's advocacy, it's awareness building, because that's really where our society is. I think people have a misconception around persons with disabilities, and we need to break that down.
Prime Minister Dr. Terence True has described climate change as an existential threat to humanity. Unfortunately, small island developing states such as St. Kitts and Nevis bear the brunt of the consequences of climate change, such as drought and more severe hurricanes, which threaten both our lives and livelihoods. This drives home the critical importance of the move toward becoming a sustainable island state, which will improve our resilience against the threats climate change presents. Senator Phillip shares Dr. Drew's vision for a climate-resilient St. Kitts and Nevis. She expressed that the government is looking at ways to expand its social safety nets to address the consequences of climate change in our society. And while small island nations like St. Kitts and Nevis combined contribute less than 10% of the world's carbon emissions, which is the primary contributor to the climate change phenomenon, Senator Phillip believes we must all still take action to reduce our carbon footprint on the planet while protecting our environment and conserving precious natural resources here at home.
And so it is a very huge threat. It's just a huge threat to our existence. And so whenever I have the conversation about climate change and its potential threat, for me, the conversation, I need to have the conversation. I have the conversation mostly with the youth that we engage with through the youth department, through the work that we do, because it just takes one tsunami to wipe us out. Mm-hmm. This is a matter of our existence. It's an existential threat to us. And so I think that we do need to target and start educating our young people about how we can be a lot more conservative, how we can be a lot more smart in terms of, building up, in terms of becoming adaptable. It's a threat to, any gains in reducing poverty, because, one hurricane could wipe out our food stores, So it's the greatest threat to, I think, just us as a people. And when I'm communicating this to the young people, I have to really break it down on a day-to-day level in terms of, one, what you experience in school in terms of how hot you are and how uncomfortable and miserable you feel in learning this lesson is because we don't have no control over how hot what the temperatures. We don't. The reason we have to shift to renewables is so that we can reduce the cost of energy, so that the government has even the option of saying, okay, let's outfit all of our schools with air conditioning to make it, more comfortable for you. But that means we need you as young people to start changing your habits in terms of, conserving water, in terms of recycling. So, we don't have so much in, the planet. How do you also influence your parents to kind of think about, being more energy efficient in their dealings. And so it's something we all need to be cognizant of, and it's something we all need to appreciate that, you might not think that recycling this plastic bottle matters, but it does. Imagine if everybody thought, oh, well, there's only one bottle, so it's not going to matter. If everybody thought that, then we would be swimming in plastic. But if everybody thought that, yes, me recycling this one bottle matters, then that's 55,000 plastic bottles that we can recycle, So I think it's just kind of, how do we communicate? How do we make sure that people understand it on the very, very micro level of what it really means to me personally about climate change and what that means as a threat to my existence and my ability to live here on this beautiful island.
Earlier in this series, Attorney General Garth Wilkin explained his goal of creating a modernized legal framework that is capable of meeting the challenges of the 21st century. Minister Phillip supports this agenda, and while much work remains to be done, she expressed pleasure with the progress that has been made over the last 2 years in strengthening social protections legislation.
I think when it comes to a legislative agenda, I have to give so much props to Attorney General Garth Wilkin. He is a very hard worker. I think I'm very pleased with just how we've been able to table a lot through Parliament, especially just in light of, we would have just gotten into government. We did hit the ground running even on the legal side. And I'm pleased to know that one of the very first pieces of legislation that would have passed through the House was one that helped to provide more protections to victims and survivors of domestic violence. I think that's significant because we do have a number of laws that impact social, problems, social policy, social issues that are a bit outdated, that make it very challenging for the systems to work. So, for instance, and this comes up all the time in my conversation. So, for instance, when it comes to juveniles and the way we treat with, I don't like to call children delinquent, but the way we deal with challenging or at-risk youth, yes. The way we deal with children and young people who are, have behavioral problems, who are at risk in terms of the likelihood for them to develop a life in adulthood in violence and crime. The way we treat with these individuals in our society is challenging. We have juvenile justice legislation that is guided by regional and international standards. But there's certain systems and processes, things that don't work well enough. So and that's as part of why, as a result of some of our laws that can be a bit conflicting of each other. For instance, we have age of consent is 16. And then the age for you to do anything or be recognized as a legal person is 18. Mm-hmm. And so if we want to be able, it's a challenge for us to reprimand or to hold accountable a young person who maybe starts engaging early in, sexual activity or is seen to be sexually aggressive or violent at the age of 16 when they're legally able to do these things. But then, they have to wait till they're 18. So for instance, that's an instance where we have conflicts in the laws. We certainly have moved forward in terms of, decriminalizing the use of cannabis, recognizing that persons who practice religiously and use the substance as part of religious rituals ought to be able to have that right. And so we recognize that through the law by decriminalizing, but then of course, it's still a substance. But we see on the other side, we're not actually enforcing the laws that already exist when it comes to young people not just purchasing or young people using or substances like alcohol and cannabis. So there are areas where the legislation is a bit weak. There are areas where we don't actually enforce some of these things. And so we still have a lot of work to do. I think engagements with the Department and the Ministry of Justice and Legal Affairs is ongoing because there is a breadth and depth of laws that do exist, but we realize there are conflicts with a number of them that make it challenging for us to treat with our problems, with juveniles, with kind of rehabilitation, with reintegration of these individuals, even persons, even adults who've been incarcerated, and so. While we have done certain significant things in terms of what we've done to change the Domestic Violence Act, there are still changes within that in and of itself in terms of what we recognize as partner violence. While we don't want to ignore the fact that violence also takes place among persons in same-sex types of situations. who should also, I believe, receive protection under the law. Not saying what they're doing is morally right or wrong, but just noting that by virtue of their humanity, they also are entitled to protection under the law if they experience violence. And so, these are very big, controversial issues in some ways, but I think we do certainly have a willingness for review and revision, which is a process that is ongoing. And I look forward to seeing us being able to table more legislation that are connected to social issues, social problems in the future.
While each ministry has its own function, they cooperate closely to achieve the greater goal of transforming St. Kitts and Nevis into a sustainable island state. While this collaborative approach to attaining a common outcome is fairly novel, Senator Phillip says it is a model that works, with the ultimate benefit being the tangible benefits for the nation's people.
The attitude and sentiment of cooperation and collaboration is certainly there. It shows in the kinds of conversations that I'm able to have with my colleagues in cabinet. It shows in just the level of thought that I think is put into programs and initiatives that are launched through other ministries by other ministries. And so for me, I appreciate the receptiveness that, my colleagues have in cabinet when I come and say, not everybody has a social policy type of lens. That's the lens through which I function and I operate. And so it's always nice when, we go to cabinet and we have these conversations and, for example, I always speak to, the Minister of Agriculture and I say, well, Minister, when are people going to start to feel the reduction in the cost of food in their pockets? Because that's really what it is. But, there's a lot of work and investment that's going into agriculture because, for instance, the 25 by 25 agenda is actually something that I believe will also help us to reduce what we're seeing in terms of, food insecurity for poor people. It will help us to make sure that we can help to improve, the health and well-being of our people, SDG 3. And so, it will help us to achieve, the success of my colleagues, vision and plans in agriculture, Minister Duckins, is also, it will help me to achieve, my objectives in terms of reducing poverty, improving health and well-being, improving food security and just the cost of living, reducing that. Because if we can, in fact, help to grow more and start to export, which would then essentially should mean that the cost of food in our market should reduce. People should be able to access healthier food locally. That should ultimately translate over time as people accessing buying healthier food produce, hopefully a reduction in NCDs, hopefully a reduction in the cost of food, which ultimately reduces the cost of living. And so for me, supporting these initiatives, helping to inform and helping to be able to go and say, well, one of the things that we notice from the data from the people who come to access social assistance is, the poorest among us, this is actually data that we would have received regionally, is that, among the poorest of our populations, they're spending to 40% of their income on food. Imagine. And so which means that's an area where if we can provide, if we can do programs like, Agriculture launched their backyard garden program where we can get people to start growing their own food. We live on an island, La Amiga, the most fertile soil. You drop seeds anywhere, anything grows. So if we can get, people also involved in the process of, growing their own food, that, essentially, should mean that they have to spend a little bit less. Because, if they're able to grow, herbs, if they're able to grow tomatoes, and these items, you can and then that helps to shift diets and nutrition over time as well. So that's really the big vision. That's really the big picture. That's the big theory. And so it does help to be able to have these conversations in cabinets, with other ministers, so that they realize and they see how, yes, what you're doing over here helps me over here. And that's how the cooperation and the collaboration will certainly work. We continue, like I said, it can be improved. But, it is part of the big picture. So, in the big picture, all of the things are connected. And so the work for us right now is to see how we actually connect the dots on the ground through the government systems.
In respect of your portfolio and responsibilities, what are some of the legislative changes you would like to see? Of course, influenced by the fact that you are academically trained in government policy, creating the policies which influence legislation.
Right. So I think when it comes to a legislative agenda, I have to give so much props to Attorney General Gath Wilkin. He is a very hard worker. I think I'm very pleased with just how we've been able to table a lot through Parliament, especially just in light of, we would have just gotten into government. We did hit the ground running even on the legal side. And I'm pleased to know that one of the very first pieces of legislation that would have passed through the House was one that helped to provide more protections to victims and survivors of domestic violence. I think that's significant because we do have a number of laws that impact social, problems, social policy, social issues that are a bit outdated, that make it very challenging for the systems to work. So, for instance, and this comes up all the time in my conversation. So, for instance, when it comes to juveniles and the way we treat with, I don't like to call children delinquent, but the way we deal with challenging or at-risk youth, yes. The way we deal with children and young people who are, have behavioral problems, who are at risk in terms of the likelihood for them to develop a life in adulthood in violence and crime. The way we treat with these individuals in our society is challenging. We have juvenile justice legislation that is guided by regional and international standards. But there are certain systems and processes, things that don't work well enough. So and that's as part of why, as a result of some of our laws, that can be a bit conflicting of each other. For instance, we have age of consent is 16. And then the age for you to do anything or be recognized as a legal person is 18. Mm-hmm. And so if we want to be able, it's a challenge for us to reprimand or to hold accountable a young person who maybe starts engaging early in, sexual activity or is seen to be sexually aggressive or violent at the age of 16 when they're legally able to do these things. But then, they have to wait till they're 18. So for instance, that's an instance where we have conflicts in the laws. We certainly have moved forward in terms of, decriminalizing the use of cannabis, recognizing that persons who practice religiously and use the substance as part of religious rituals ought to be able to have that right. And so we recognize that through the law by decriminalizing, but then of course, it's still a substance. But we see on the other side, we're not actually enforcing the laws that already exist when it comes to young people, not just purchasing or young people using or substances like alcohol and cannabis. So there are areas where the legislation is a bit weak. There are areas where we don't actually enforce some of these things. And so, we still have a lot of work to do. I think, engagements with the Department and the Ministry of Justice and Legal Affairs is ongoing because there is a breadth and depth of, laws that do exist, but we realize there are conflicts with a number of them that make it challenging for us to treat with our problems, with juveniles, with, kind of rehabilitation, with reintegration of, these individuals, even persons, even adults who've been incarcerated. And so while, we have done certain significant things in terms of what we've done to change the Domestic Violence Act, there are still changes within that in and of itself in terms of, what we recognize as partner-partner violence. While we don't want to ignore the fact that violence also takes place among persons in same-sex types of situations, who should also, I believe, receive protection under the law. Not saying what they're doing is morally right or wrong, but just noting that by virtue of their humanity, they also are entitled to protection under the law if they experience violence. And so, these are very big, controversial issues in some ways, but I think we do certainly have a willingness for review and revision, which is a process that is ongoing. And I look forward to seeing us being able to table more legislation that are connected to social issues, social problems in the future.
Senator Phillip is looking forward to the future, having charted a new course for her ministry that aligns with Prime Minister Drew's greater vision of transforming the Federation into a sustainable island state. She told me that the areas under her supervision will continue to build on the gains that have been made in the first half of the administration, as she and her team continue to refine the new and existing programs and streamline the ministry's operations for greater efficiency. The minister also pointed to the importance of ongoing data collection to ensure that the government stays ahead of trends that indicate the needs of the community so that plans can be made well in advance to meet them.
I would like, the thrust for me is how do we get the departments through the ministries that I work with, how do we get them functioning at their highest, doing the very basic things that they're intended to do. I don't feel that we're quite there yet, but for me, that's the focus right now. And in the process of improving what's already been, what's would have, reincarnating, revising, refreshing what was there, then how do we collect the data to see in light of the change and the modernization that we're looking to achieve? And so for me, the process is really about, how do we do better at what was already established as primary and foundational? How do we make that working optimally? How do we make sure that, regardless of, the leadership changes or anything, how do we make sure that what you're known to function as functions, and make sure that's well established? And then for me, it's, and this I think is something that will come as we continue to do the work and as we become known for what we are essentially supposed to be doing, is providing social assistance, providing programming, supports, empowerment, opportunities, wraparound services. When we become known and, very good at that, through that process, we'll be able to collect more information and data to determine what are the needs of St. Kitts and Nevis society in 2024, 2025, in this century, in this generation. And from that, I want to believe that I have the capacity and I have the support of a cabinet with their inputs to be able to then say, in the next year and a half, what is the new program that needs to be introduced, or how do we collaborate to make something to kind of improve a system, or take this to a 2.0. Because sometimes it doesn't necessarily require the creation of something new, but maybe how do we connect these two things so that they work a bit more seamlessly, where, maybe, through NAC you get your house, maybe you get a house that's, already subsidized, but in that house you already have a plot where you have to plant, and then through social services you kind of say, okay, like how do I get connected to kind of get the information and support to be able to be part of this backyard gardening program? How do we connect the dots a bit more seamlessly so everybody benefits from all that the government is doing, all that the government is offering, in jest of, with the sense of, social responsibility and social protection for our people.
As the interview neared an end, Senator Phillip told me while she has no great personal ambition to be remembered for any specific thing she's done in service of her nation, she would feel a great sense of fulfillment if the initiatives and programs she played a part in developing withstand the test of time.
I don't really think about myself being personally remembered, because I think the reality of things, especially when I think about politics and policies, they're good things that have been set up and established, especially under Inclusivity Labour Party administrations. But people don't always remember who did that thing. But that doesn't mean that thing is any less significant or any less valuable. It literally forms part of the fabric of society right now. And you can say that about a lot of initiatives. So, obviously there's certain things that, so our transition from, sugar industry to tourism, that was huge. It's huge. We can never take that from Dr. Douglas, but then there are also things that happened in between those times. So for instance, the introduction of the sea bridge, the very, very first sea bridge, not the very big fancy one we have now. But that at that time was, monumental. But I'm sure nobody actually remembers who did that. That was actually done by the Honorable Cedric Library during his time, by the way. But people don't really remember who did the thing. And so for me, I don't really think about it as, wanting to be remembered. I would just hope that whatever changes I have led to be able to be implemented, to be able to be established, that they stand the test of time, and that for whatever it's worth, that if it's a small thing, if it's a big thing, that it is able to be a timeless part of the new norm of what society is going to look like in the next generation. I would hope that, the seniors programs can continue, that it can continue to be funded, that it can grow, that, hopefully, who knows, potentially we can have a space, a physical space that, is, a facility for seniors. That might not come in my time, but because of this seed that has been planted and established, under my leadership, under my supervision and management, that it can then lead to the next thing that hopefully down the line when I'm old, I get to benefit from it. And, at that time, nobody might remember that I did the thing that it started with me, but I would still hope that people are able to benefit from, because it's just a positive difference that was made in society at the time.
She also expressed sincere gratitude to the Federation's people for giving Prime Minister Dr. Terence Drew and his team the opportunity to serve them and implement meaningful changes that will improve the quality of their lives.
I would say, thank the people of St. Kitts and Nevis for the level of confidence that they would have placed in this Labour Party administration under the leadership of the Honourable Dr. Terence Drew. One thing that I've learned, obviously, is, governing and politics are, two different things, and sometimes they can come in face of each other. But despite of that, I think the level of trust that the good people of this federation have offered to the Inclusivity Labour Party as an administration, it's not taken lightly. And I would really hope and trust that, even though it may seem like, we've come in and there are changes that have made that have been a bit disruptive, that people also can trust that this is a leadership that actually has vision. And that's the kind of leadership you need, because the adage about, where there is no vision, the people will perish is very true. And I believe that has been seen under the last administration, especially where we had to call the people called for, even within that own, administration, it fell apart because there wasn't a shared vision among that administration and that cabinet. But this is a cabinet that I have the honor and privilege of being a part of, that I'm very pleased to be a part of, because the people voted for an administration that has real plans and that has real care. And, the leadership with Dr. Drew, we all share that sentiment. We all, at the very least, share a desire to really, really achieve the Sustainable Island State agenda, which we all believe is doable for us and is in the best interest of the people of this federation. And so I just want to thank the people and ask for their continued confidence and their continued patience and cooperation in the process. Change is not easy for any of us, and transformation doesn't come lightly, you know. Caterpillars turn into butterflies every day, but that's a process. And so I just hope and trust that we can all be confident in the process and trust that, you know, we're going in the right direction, and, you know, that the Single Civil Party administration is the best administration to take us there.
With that word from the Minister with responsibility for social development and gender affairs, youth empowerment, aging and disabilities, Senator Isalean Phillip, we end another journey into the work of each of the ministers who form Prime Minister Dr. Terence Drew's A team. Thank you for watching, and I invite you to join me next time for The 9, an era of transformation. I'm Ebony Brandon.